I'm Alan Wardis, and you're listening to Think Radio.
It's the idea of live and let live. Let's be respectful. Can we see beyond differences? And I think in a community like this, the things that we value and the things that we find common ground on way outnumber the things that we don't.
That's for my recent conversation about local governance with Gunnison County Commissioner Jonathan Houck. Stick around for much more on this episode of Think Radio.
Think Radio is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison's locally owned hometown newspaper, and by the Western State Colorado University Office of Academic Affairs. Think Radio is also supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can become a Think Radio patron, visit alanwardesmedia.com. That's ALANWARTES media.com.
Jonathan, thanks for joining me.
Sure, it's nice to be with you and in your new space.
Yeah, for those of you who can't see, we're in the ICE Lab today recording this episode. The ICE Lab is on the campus of Western State Colorado University. It stands for Innovation, Creativity, and Entrepreneurship. And a lot of cool things going on here, including this brand new sound booth that we're using. So thanks to those folks. Well, I've really been interested in getting you in here for a conversation because one of the things that I discovered working for the newspaper all those years as a reporter for the Gunnison Times was how interesting local governance is, sort of against perception. Most people would think boring, you know, what goes on in a county commissioner meeting, for instance. But I discovered just the opposite. And so you, being a relatively young man in this business of politics, sort of struck me as a fascinating character, and I'd love to know more about your story, starting with, how'd you wind up in Gunnison?
So, interestingly enough, I was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and was heavily involved in Boy Scouts as an outlet to be able to go camping and go outside. And when I say Baltimore, I grew up in the inner city, West Baltimore, row home, very urban environment. And through my experience in scouting, I had finished high school, I'd earned my Eagle Scout Award, and I randomly applied for a job at the Philmont Scout Ranch in Cimarron, New Mexico, which is between Raton and Taos. So right out of high school, get on a bus, travel across the country for the first time, and I see the mountains of northern New Mexico, which landscape-wise is very much like Gunnison.
Nothing at all like Baltimore,
Nothing like Baltimore.
Or anything on the East Coast, for that matter.
And it was a real eye-opening experience, and just the impact of the vastness of the West, the landscape. It really made an instant impression on me. And so I came back and worked another summer in New Mexico, and then eventually moved to, of all places, Boulder, because through Scouts I'd been introduced to rock climbing, and I was really passionate about rock climbing, and that was pretty much the epicenter of rock climbing in the United States was Boulder, Colorado. And so I lived in Boulder for 2 years, and in that time I was really fortunate to be able to spend most of my time climbing. I had some small climbing sponsorships, and I worked at a rock climbing gym, mounting the holds on the wall. It's called route setting. And so I was really just wrapped in this entire scene in Boulder of climbing. It was the early 90s. It was a really exciting time. And I realized I should go back to school and I should focus on getting a degree. And I immediately chose not to go to Fort Collins or to CU in Boulder because I felt like I'd be too distracted. So I chose Gunnison because I didn't ski. I wasn't necessarily a big fan of winter. And it felt like these natural sideboards that would keep me focused on class and school, and it seemed like a neat little place. And so I moved here in 1992.
Yeah, because there's nothing else to distract you here in Gunnison.
Yeah. So coming here as someone who really wasn't, attracted to a lot of the things that people typically find as their port of entry to Gunnison County was different for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems like a strange sort of monkish thing to do, to choose winter when you didn't like it.
And my first year here, 92, 93, it snowed a ton. And after the first big snow, I remember walking around campus here and thinking, well, this will melt. And it didn't until the spring. So it was definitely a change in the climate. But interestingly enough, I spent my first 2 years at Western as a resident advisor, actually here in this building in Escalante. I spent my summers going back to Boulder and working for one of the climbing companies who sponsored me. And I was fairly lukewarm on Gunnison until I spent a summer. And I had two great jobs. I was working at Rock and Roll Sports for Dave Moe, and I was working at the Bean.
Both of which are epicenters of everything that happens and every one that happens in the Gunnison Valley.
And it just opened up this place as more than the place I go to school. And I really started to get a sense of the community by just happenstance. I had a Friday night where I had nothing going on. I went to the Headwaters Conference. That's how I met George Sibley. I think you and I probably met for the first time.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Through Headwaters. And it really started, I don't know, it just kind of planted a seed that's continued to grow. And so my intended 4 years in Gunnison County has turned into 25 at this point.
Well, that's kind of a common story. A lot of people come
Absolutely.
here with that very intention, in fact, myself included, because you and I arrived here the same year. I started at Western myself in 1992. So I relate to many parts of that story. But you've used an interesting word already, and that is the word community. When you started hanging out at the places where things were happening and where people were to be found, you discovered community. Was that something that was new to you? I mean, places like Baltimore and Boulder, scouting is a community, but not quite the same.
Well, it's interesting because I've had this discussion with my sisters who still live in Maryland. They say, how do you live in such a remote place? And I remind them that Gunnison, the town, is about the size of our neighborhood in Baltimore. And growing up in the 70s and 80s in Baltimore, that it's an era before big box stores. It's an era before big commuting. So our community was about the size of Gunnison and functioned in the same way. This idea that you went to school with the same people. You played Little League with the same people. I was in scouting with people. It wasn't a lot of cross-pollination. And there were definitive edges to my community. I didn't cross a certain street because that's the next neighborhood. And so from a standpoint of size, I really got it. But, you know, when I lived in Boulder, I hung out with people who were just like me. They were young. They wanted to go rock climbing. Rock climbing was all that mattered, and everything centered around that. And Gunnison was probably the first place that exposed me to the concept that there are lots of different folks doing lots of different things, but there's a common element that there's only so many of us. And I think that's really, for me, in my time as a commissioner, my time on the Gunnison City Council, has been a common thread of how I've seen this community, that we can be different in the things that we value or spend our time, our efforts, our energies towards, but there's a critical mass, and you need everyone sometimes pulling in the same direction for the big issues.
So when you made the decision to stay here, it was with that kind of thing in mind?
Yeah, I was attending school at Western. My degree is in sociology. I also at the time was getting a secondary teaching license endorsement in social studies. And because I had a background in outdoor education, I knew that I wanted to pursue some type of alternative experiential education opportunities. I had kind of lined up the ability to go student teach at an alternative school that had been well established down in Cortez. And this being the community it is, Karen Emerso and Paul Duba, who I knew through Wilderness Pursuit, said, hey, we're working on putting together an alternative school here. You should be on the board of folks working on that. And I was invited to be something that I don't think typically a college student would be invited to be part of. And so in doing that, I was on the board that founded the Gunnison Valley School, the alternative high school that existed here for about a dozen years. And so not only did I discover community, but I was anchored into something I was passionate about, and I really wanted to find a way to be involved in. And so I graduated from Western in 96, and I started teaching for the school district in the 97-98 school year.
And how would you say that being involved with the school really went ahead and cemented what you'd already begun with your involvement in the Gunnison community? Because I think we knew each other before you were a teacher at the Alti School. But if I were to point to a memory of you and say, that's when I feel like Jonathan Houck, as we know him today, really started to emerge, it was when you were involved with those kids. How would you put that?
Yeah, I think that the Valley School, the alternative school, was for me, it was an eye-opening experience. And I think that when you become involved in institutions in a community that serve everyone and serve everyone equally, you see such a broad spectrum of the community. And it was the first time I think I really started to see that there were some folks in this community that faced significant challenges, whether it was housing issues, whether it was healthcare issues, whether it was stability of employment for parents that allowed them to provide for their children in a way that they weren't needing as much as others. There were kids who were living on their own. There were kids who were in the legal system. And it really, for me, showed that Baltimore to Gunnison, the difference at first blush is incredibly different, but we're human beings, and the challenges that we face are relatively similar from the smallest towns to the biggest cities. And that this was a place where maybe the opportunities that I had been given by people investing in me, investing time in the things that I believed in, it almost just naturally opened to be able to do that here. And the alternative school was such an amazing, just blank canvas. I mean, it was pretty much have academic integrity, meet the requirements that the school district has, and go be as creative as you can.
Wow. Don't get a blank check like that very often.
That's true.
So did it come as a big surprise to you, though, that there would be some sort of entrenched social issues here as well as elsewhere? Because I think some people would be surprised by that.
And I find that in my work now. Some people are amazingly surprised, and others are not surprised at all. And I think that for a lot of folks, there's they know it exists. It's taking off the blinders to see it. And I think that the issues that challenge any community are issues that can be resolved within the community. And I think the alternative school was a good example of it was founded at a time where there were kids who really needed something significantly different. They didn't need a lower bar. They needed a different bar. And to be able to provide that in a community of this size showed that the community was really willing to be invested and involved. And I look at the folks who made up, that original board that worked on the school. Chris Siegwart is the director of the special services program for the district. She was at the lead of it. But we had folks from the Park Service and from Western. The county attorney, David Baumgarten, was involved. We had Karen Emerso and Paul Duba, who Wilderness Pursuits and Outward Bound as their background really came with a strong push for experiential outdoor education. And we had folks from Gunnison High School who literally were saying, we want to help be part of the solution. How can we be part? I mean, it was a great glimpse into how a community solves problems. What I realized is at first I saw it as a problem, but this community saw it as an opportunity. And so I feel like the teaching skill set for a political life is a very good skill set to have.
Cool. Well, I want to come back to that because we're going to get to what it takes to be involved in local governance in a minute. But we've skipped a step, and that is, how do you go from being the rock climbing guy? You didn't even like winter. You came here to focus on education. You're a college guy. You write a book about rock climbing, so you kind of cement yourself in that community. Where's the leap? There's something there that went from that Jonathan Houck to the guy who said, you know what? I think I'm going to run for public office.
Well, there's a definitive moment where I thought about the opportunity to serve the community in an elected political position. But the way I got to rock climbing was through scouting. And what scouting represented to me in my life was there were adults and there were people in my community who saw a need and they responded to it. And that's always resonated with me. And it's one of the reasons I choose to do some of the things that I do, whether it's coaching and things like that with kids and teaching, was that there were adults in my life that I'm still friends with today who made a difference in lots of kids' lives. And numerous coaches and scout leaders I had kids who were well gone and out of scouts, out of playing ball and things like that, but they continued to do the good work because it was good for the community. And so to me, teaching was a natural extension of, wow, rock climbing got me here, but what got me rock climbing? People investing their time and their effort and their energy into the youth in my community. I've lost some friends that I grew up with to drugs, to gang violence, to some pretty hard stuff. And I feel very fortunate that I was one of the people who found a path that gave me something that was meaningful.
Still, there are people who have that exact philosophy, and they're coaching the Little League team also. And it never once crosses their mind to be an elected official.
Well, it was interesting because working at the alternative school was one specific conversation with Fred Field that turned the corner for me.
Fred Field, the iconic rancher politician.
That's right. And one of the great flexibilities of the alternative school was our ability to incorporate community and community opportunities into the classroom. And so during election years especially, I would really do a big push coming right into school with a big civics class based on kids learning about the democratic process. And one of the most accessible ways for them to see that was what's going on locally. And so we would study the local issues, and then we'd have a candidate debate. And so Fred Field and Hap Channel, who were running, Fred was running for re-election and Hap was challenging at the time, came in for a candidate debate with maybe 10 students, 12 students. And they asked them questions and issues that pertain to Gunnison County. And so the class was over. The kids had gone to lunch. Hap had left. Fred was packing up. Fred always had that suitcase. I always remember Fred's kind of leather suit, or not suitcase, but briefcase. And he was snapping it shut. And he said to me, he said, Jonathan, have you ever thought about maybe getting on the town council or being more involved? And though I had voted for Fred, my comment to him and I don't know why it came out this way. I said, well, Fred, I don't know if you'd really want that. I mean, you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat. And he kind of chuckled. And I'll never forget, his hands were on top of his briefcase. He was just closing his briefcase, and he smiled and he laughed at me and he said, Jonathan, the only thing that matters in local politics is that you care about the place that you represent and the place you live. And he said, from what I've seen going on here, it seems that you care. And it really struck a chord with me. And within a few months' time, there was an opening on the City of Gunnison Planning Commission, which I applied for, and I wasn't selected. And a couple months later, there was another opening. I applied, and I was put onto the Planning Commission. And I did that for maybe about 2 years, and then there was a city council member left, moved out of the community. There was an opening. I was appointed to fill that position, and then eventually ran for council twice.
Well, and the Planning Commission is notoriously a place where politics doesn't play a role.
No.
Yeah.
Because there's not an ideology. It's about applying a set of standards.
But that was a time, as I recall, when there were some political divisions in the county.
Mm-hmm.
And people would have looked at Fred from the outside and said, oh, he's the stalwart Republican. But his message to you was about place.
It was place, yep. We talk a lot about a sense of place. I try to govern from place.
And so that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. Because governance these days seems rooted in anything but place. We're so distracted by distant issues, distant events, distant personalities. How do you keep yourself rooted in that philosophy of politics is about place?
I think at the local level, for one, it's the challenge, but it's the reward of those who ask you to represent them. You get to see them a lot. You know, you've heard me joke. Public hearings happen either at the courthouse or I'm in the produce aisle. But that's part of what it is. I mean, our kids are going to the same school. We're attending the same community activities. You know, you're seeing folks in the food store, you know, down on Main Street at the lighting of the Christmas tree, whatever it may be. I spend a lot of time in Crested Butte as well, because then you get to talk about the issues. You don't talk about the letter behind your name on a ballot. Though for some people, the letter behind your name will be where the conversation stops, and that's okay. I spend my time trying to engage people on the issues and the things we're trying to do as a community, not on the R, the D, the U, or the I.
And do you find that most people who live in a community like ours are willing to go there with you and talk about nuts and bolts?
I think so. You know, it's interesting if you look at it by the numbers. You know, so here's a good example. The last county commissioner election in 2016, the commissioner districts 1 and 2 were in play. District 1 was your very traditional Republican candidate, Democratic candidate, and there were a number of votes that were cast in that district. In my district, I ran again for re-election as a Democrat, and I ran against someone who was unaffiliated. The undercount, the number of votes difference between those two districts, there was, I think it's 500-600 less votes in my district than in the other. And so you can at least try to wrap your head around what is the difference. And maybe some folks looked at that and said, well, in an R&D, I can make an easy choice. In this one, I might be an R. Jonathan's a D. There's no R in this race. I might not vote. It's hard to say. You can't put your finger on it. But I think there's some of that, but not a huge amount. Because the issue is values. If you're governing from place, that means you're governing from values. And if we're governing around values, I think the values in this community are pretty consistent.
Yeah, and yet still there are issues that people get excited about or upset about that really aren't particularly place-oriented. I mean, I'm thinking of some of the social justice issues, for instance, that are true anywhere. What are the issues that you think are just about this place, that no one else is dealing with in exactly the same way as we do here?
I want to say the majority of the things that we deal with at a county level are connected to the land. Whether you live in one of the towns or you live in one of the rural part of the communities, whether you're connected to agriculture or recreation or Main Street or Elk Avenue business, the landscape defines this place. And out of that, there is a sense of responsibility and a sense of protecting that because, water is the center of all of our economy here, whether it's irrigating pastures to grow hay, to sustain agriculture and the raising of cattle, whether it is recreation, whether it's falling on the mountain as snow that we recreate on and then coming down the rivers to be kind of the lifeblood of, the summer recreational capacities.
Well, yeah, I'm a sailor. I want something to
Yeah,
float my boat
out on the
on.
mesa. That's right. And I think, from that, the idea that we take care of each other, that's something that happens here, and just today, you look at these icy streets and we've just had a snowfall event in the city and the county, and folks are out moving snow and getting it out of the way. But when someone's car slides off the edge of Ohio Creek Road, we don't stop and check voter registration. That's someone that needs some help. Let's help them out and get them out of the ditch. And some people might only be able to push. Someone else might have a chain or a tow strap in their vehicle. We come with different tools, but we come to help. And I think that's what our community does. Now, what that looks like, I think some of those things maybe are ideological. Is it the government's place to be helping with issues around housing or healthcare? There's some views that tend to define themselves somewhere along the political spectrum there. But I think it's interesting that there's also some bigger picture things. When I get outside of Colorado, when I'm back in Maryland and people are perplexed by the marijuana legalization, and to have friends go, wow, you must live in this like totally liberal place where everyone thinks marijuana is cool. And I said, it's interesting. I said, my community, my county actually demographically is about, if you look at voter registration, it kind of mirrors the state. And I believe Gunnison County is 28% Republican, 32% Democratic, and 40% unaffiliated. So here we are, this purple county. And I feel as though there's kind of this give and take in. There might be someone who's a ag producer, for example, who says, my land and my water, please respect that. And in turn, they might turn around and say, you know what? If I want people to respect my land and my water, I'm going to respect their right to make a choice on marijuana or some issue like that
or
maybe
recreation
or something that maybe that isn't in, they have a hard connected view to one way or the other, but it's the idea of live and let live. Let's be respectful. Can we see beyond differences? And I think in a community like this, the things that we value and the things that we find common ground on way outnumber the things that we don't.
Well, let's talk about sort of the poster child for what you've just described, going back to when you first started becoming aware and involved. Me too. I was working at the newspaper at the time and covering this little blip on the radar called sage grouse. How would you dissect what has happened in the intervening years around sage grouse as a good example, or maybe a bad example? How do you see sage grouse as a practical outworking of community and local governance?
Yeah, the sage grouse is, it might be one of the best examples for our community. The bird was not listed. And then I was sworn in January of 2013, and a week after getting sworn in, the Fish and Wildlife Service announced that it was a candidate species again. It was going to go through that whole process. So I dove into sage grouse world pretty quickly. Previous commissioners had worked on it quite a bit. Paula Swenson had been at the forefront of sage grouse work. So I jumped in with her and learned as quick as I could. And what quickly became evident was the common ground was if we take care of the bird, we take care of ourselves. And so I look at, Jessica Young, along with others here at Western who were instrumental in identifying that it was actually somewhat different than the greater sage grouse in that species classification. I look at the ranchers who were actually the ones who came to the county first and said, we need to be out in front of this. That was 20 years ago.
Well, I was there. I was covering some of those working group meetings. And honestly, though, I can't say that those early meetings were dominated by this idea of we take care of the bird,
right.
We take care of ourselves. It was more of a gathering of chieftains trying to stake out which territory they were going to defend.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it got to a kumbaya place at all quickly.
But
I think that's part of what you see in governance, and it's what you see in issues. You have to tussle with the hard stuff for a while. Mm-hmm. There's a photo. I was just looking at the photo book of Barack Obama's. His presidential photographer just released a book, and one of my favorite photos in the book is he had a plaque on his desk that said "Hard things are hard."
It's
And sage grouse is a great example of that. Hard things are hard. And so if you're a rancher, what you don't want is your ability to use public lands for summer grazing while you're growing your hay crop to be impacted. If you're someone that's worked on discovering this new species, you want robust protections for it. If you're a recreationalist, you don't want your favorite trail closed. No matter what angle you come from, you have some peace about it, and you tussle over that for a while. The trails aren't the reason this bird's declining. Ranching isn't the reason this bird's declining. You are the reason this bird's declining. I mean, and so there's this, but you've got to go through that hard stuff, and after a while, what becomes evident is, well, if we all row in the same direction, can we all get most of what we want out of this?
Yeah, but the key there is we're all in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
You have to all be in the same room at least to figure out that you can do that.
Absolutely.
What makes the Gunnison Valley different in that regard? Because there are communities where they don't get in the same room with each other.
That's true. And I will say that one piece I always tried to impress upon students, because I taught social studies, I taught history and geography and civics, I always reminded them, you can never, ever separate your history from your geography. I think the geography of this place is a truly defining piece.
I want to know more about that. Why do you think that would...
Think about it. Essentially, you've got the corridor. You've got Mount Crested Butte to Gunnison, so you've got that 32 miles there. Beyond that, you're going 60, 70 miles in any direction over a pass to get to the next county, to the next town of size. We tend to have weather events that isolate us here in and of our own.
So let me paraphrase this then. We're kind of stuck with each other. It's not like we can go down the road and hang out with somebody else.
Yeah, but I think in a good way.
Yeah.
Because I know, like, folks in our ranching community, we have the Gunnison County stock growers, but they have associations in neighboring communities that have some of the same goals and aspirations as they do. But there's something different about how the Gunnison stock growers will work with BLM and Forest Service on their permits than maybe another community will. And I think what there's this true willingness. The issues don't go away by just putting on the blinders. The issues get resolved by people rolling up their sleeves and working. And that's what's happened with sage grouse. And that's, to a degree, what's happening right now with recreation. Recreation's taken such a boom. And a lot of folks in other communities would say it's going to be ranching or it's going to be recreation. And I think we have a community that says we're going to figure out how to have both. Will there be some impacts on both sides? Yep, there's going to be some trails that potentially are closed or limited. Are there going to be more pressures on ag on public lands? Yep, they're going to be. But there are also tools to mitigate that. And so let's spend time working on those tools rather than working on the fight.
What you're describing is democracy in its sort of... I mean, I don't want to get all sappy here, but you're describing the way democracy is supposed to work, and that is coming from various positions and meeting somewhere in the middle. But we're living in a society now where, at least at the national level, that is the last thing on people's minds. The polarity is deeper and more intense than a lot of commentators say they've ever seen.
Yep.
Why in the world would this place be different at this moment in time?
Well, I think one is long before this intense, cutthroat, partisan bickering that and partisan divides have always existed.
Right.
But not at this level that we're feeling right now. This community was successful by coming together on numerous things, whether it was opposing Union Park.
Mm-hmm. That's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, whether it was, the thing that's interesting in this community, and I do a lot of our legislative work in Denver with the other counties from around the state, take all the urban, populated Front Range communities. They're different, because of their needs and things. But take all your rural counties in Colorado, Eastern Plains, Western Slope. Find a county that has a university, a ski area, oil and gas development, a coal mine, true agriculture, not hobby agriculture, real long-standing agriculture, deep water rights, the largest body of water in the state,
recreationists of every stripe.
Yeah,
spruce beetle.
Yeah, spruce beetle epidemics, so forest and public lands issues, threatened species, some of the best big game hunting and fishing in the state, if not in the western United States. I mean, you start you're hard pressed to find another county. I'm not saying that other counties don't have great qualities, but we tend to have this stool that has 8 or 10 legs on it, where some counties like Garfield County or Weld County are really known for their extensive oil and gas development. Summit County is really known as a almost recreation-only county. You're hard-pressed to find a county that has as many of the different things that we have, and if you want to keep that stool steady, every one of those 8 to 10 legs gets a little bit of attention. Mm-hmm. And it takes a community of people to do that.
It's interesting to me that you just described all of those things as assets. I mean, listening to your language, you think of those things as all assets. Some people would see them as liabilities. I mean, a threatened species, oil and gas development,
right,
depending on your point of view.
Right. And to bring that full circle to your question about why does that, what makes this place different and special, I think that there is no silver bullet for Gunnison County. For example, if you're a county that relies almost predominantly on oil and gas development, and the price of natural gas takes a huge dive and your production goes down, that creates a huge stir. And when you have immediate job loss, when people leave your community, when it impacts your schools and all those services that counties and municipalities provide, you scramble. And oftentimes, anything that gets in the way of that opportunity has to be cast aside. So, hey, we've got to do whatever it takes to keep that one thing afloat. Mm-hmm. You take a community like ours, we need recreation, we need ranching, we need mineral development, we need these water resources, we need these pieces to coexist, because none of them alone will keep us afloat. All of them together do. And we're not in a position, nor should we be, to sacrifice one for the other.
Right. Well, the big debate these days in that list that you just that you just rattled off is surrounding recreation, because by far recreation is the fattest leg of our economic stool. But we've come to the point where the costs of succeeding in a recreation economy are starting to really pinch, both environmentally, economically, the cost of housing and what we're dealing with there. Do you think that sustainable tourism is an oxymoron, or is it something that we can actually achieve? Sustainable meaning it does not degrade the environment to an excessive degree. It does not degrade our social support systems. People can still live here affordably. Can we achieve that? Is that possible?
Yes, I do. Hard work is hard.
That's one of those hard things.
Hard things are hard. That's right. Hard things are hard. So, what we're working on with the Sustainable Tourism and Outdoor Recreation Committee is getting into this piece, because there's no reason to hide from it. And, this does...
well, there's no way to hide from it.
There's no way to hide from it. And these are things that need to be, as a community, addressed. And so we have substantial issues around the impacts and understanding that there's a variety of recreational visitors. There is the, I'm going to come mountain biking and I'm going to camp on public land, disperse camping, I don't want to be in a campground, to I'm going to bring my RV and I'd like a campground with a hookup, to I'm going to stay in a VRBO or some type of short-term rental and go fly fishing for the day. Or I might fly fish, mountain bike, and camp in my vehicle, but I'm still going to go out and get a good dinner. I mean, it's hard to pin down who that visitor is.
So we say the word recreation, but we mean a lot of things.
We mean a lot of things, yeah. And so there is a difference between someone who likes recreating here so much that they want to purchase a second home or a condo, versus someone who, is that kind of grassroots. I like to camp, be out in the middle of nowhere. There's the mountain bike. It's interesting. Biking is something I'm very close to. It's a personal passion. I mean, they're the mountain bikers who will go camp out on public land, ride trails, and you'll never see them in town the whole weekend they're here. Yeah. Someone else feels like they've got to sit on the deck of the High Alpine Brewing or the Brick up on Elk Avenue and be seen after they go for their bike ride. I mean, we have lots of different kinds of visitors and recreationalists, but the issues are the same. So it doesn't, no one turns over a rock at a trailhead and sees human waste and goes, well, I wonder if that's a biker, or I wonder if that's a motorized user, or I wonder if that's a fly fisherman or woman. The issues are around what they are: their parking, their impacts, their human waste, their trail degradation, their impacts to waterways. And so how do we mitigate those things? That's a local solution.
And do you see signs that a functioning community of people, those chieftains gathering at the table, is coming together around that?
Yes, and I think it's bringing up some broader questions which are hard, because a lot of folks, see it as simple answers like, well, just stop advertising.
Yeah, that's one way.
In an era before the internet, you could probably diminish the number of people visiting by not running the newspaper ads or the magazine ads or the radio ads or the billboards. But word of mouth is a whole new world out there with the ability to put things out there. So people are going to be coming here. So what we should be doing is focusing on our marketing efforts, maybe trying to beef up those times of the year and those activities where we have capacity. Our shoulder seasons are some of those, but then you run into the shoulder season is the local season. Why are we gonna increase there? And so that's that community dialogue. That's the heavy lift. Those are the hard things to
Think
get
Radio
into.
is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison, Colorado's locally owned hometown newspaper. Think Radio is also supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can join the Think Radio community of patrons, visit alanwartismedia.com. That's ALANWARTES media.com.
Do you ever feel like you're stuck in a game of whack-a-mole? Because you solve one thing and
It does.
three more pop up?
And it makes governance harder because one thing hasn't changed. The way governance works is slower than the way everything else has evolved around communication and technology. And one of my kids said to me the other night, he goes, you grew up in the old days. And I think about being 13 when I was arguing with my dad, the old days. But things are instant, whether it's food, whether it's communication, whatever those things are. We get these instant things like, I want this now, Amazon drops it off. I want to send you an email, you better respond to it quickly. Here's a text message, why haven't I heard back from you? Government doesn't work at that speed. Land use doesn't.
Nor should it.
Nor should it. And so, it's a pace that is painful for people.
So that brings us back to national trends, where polarity is taking hold so powerfully. But there's another trend that I think we're only just wrapping our heads around, and that is, I would term it as the loss of information literacy. Things are moving at such a pace that there's no time and probably no inclination for a lot of people to dig deep and really understand the issues, which is something that local governance depends on, right? How do you deal with that when you're talking to constituents who are simultaneously needing to play a meaningful role in a complex local issue, but also being pushed around by these societal trends that are degrading their ability to do that?
Yeah, and there's a quick and snappy, I'll just comment on this thread on Facebook, and now I've done my civic duty. And there's times where it's like, ooh.
And that thread on Facebook may have involved information that was patently false.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges I find. And, I made the comment earlier that my teaching skill set plays well to this. When we would bring a new student into the school or someone would move to this community from another, there's this evaluative period of, okay, what do they know? What information do they need? And how do we get them to the end result, which would be, passing a class or graduation or something like that. These issues are all the same in that context of, what does someone know about this issue? What information can I provide to them? Not with my bias, not with my perspective, but where can they go find and how can I help get in their hands the realities of what we're dealing with, what our opportunities are, what our constraints are, and how can I allow them to not only kind of chew on the information, but what's the mechanism I can hear back from them? And so, it's interesting. I'll get phone calls. I'm so sick and tired of my trash can tipping over. Those trash cans are the worst things ever. And I listened to the 2 or 3 minutes. And I said, yeah, do you live in the city? Excellent. So I live in the city too, and I understand that challenge. I'm one of your county commissioners. We don't do trash collection, but let me help connect you to Public Works at the city of Gunnison. It's amazing how different it says, instead of just saying, hey, that's not my jurisdiction, that's not my authority, that has nothing to do with me. How can I help you get to the person you need? How can I share with you a little bit of information? And that's an easy example, trash collection.
Sure.
That was the one I got the other week. Someone came to
Yeah.
tell me how tippy their trash cans were. But on those bigger issues, sage grouse, water, housing, recreation, big game protections for winter habitat. What are we doing about the potential for, mine accidents from old mining relics from the past that we're trying to protect, as far as making sure the water supply is intact? I mean, these are big issues that are hard to wrap around. And then you start getting into issues with, is the Department of the Interior now pivoting on how they're going to handle recreation management or oil and gas development or coal mining? Where's the EPA on mine cleanup? I mean, and so that stuff does trickle down into what we're doing. I'm really interested to see where we take government and governance as it works and technology and communication, because there hasn't been a lot of ground that's been gained between those two. It's interesting that we can post on Facebook, we can tweet, we can email, we can do those kind of things so instantaneously. But the public hearing will be on Tuesday from at 11:30. And so how do we, what is the future of engaging these people's global ability to communicate with a process that's important and should be on a slower timeline? But how, where are we going to be in someone's ability to participate in a meeting not in the room?
Well, that's a great question. Do you see answers on the horizon? I mean,
No, I just started thinking more and more about this, because I think about, I get, people now email in public comment or, fill out forms online, and those are included in an electronic packet for us, and we can have them printed. So it's easier for people to get their public comment in. But, think about my job background here. I mean, I've worked construction, I've worked food service, I've worked retail. What is my ability to FaceTime into a meeting for 10 minutes during my break?
yeah.
And say, hey, I'd like to be heard. I mean, I know we're a ways off from that, but I'm looking forward to see how we take how people communicate and use it as a tool, not just to bash each other or to get likes or trends or follows or.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am. I'm turning into, my daughter's right. I'm
There
turning
you
into
go.
that guy. But how do we use that technology to make people go, here's what I think. Here's my point of view. Here's what I want to be heard. Here's what I want to be part of the discussion. In the interim, I continue to be out in the community as much as I can. And oftentimes people start with the apology like, I hate to bug you here, but. And I remind
the
folks,
only time I have.
that's what I signed up for.
Yeah.
And there are places I always carve out a good spot for my family. And there's been times with folks where, hey, I need to talk to you about X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, I'm coaching Little League, but here's a card. That's my cell number. Please call me. I will find time. And I try to meet people early in the morning before they go to work, find time in the evening when they're off work, because if you're 9 to 5-ing it, I should be accessible outside the time that you have to be at work.
The interesting part about that scenario is that we're together at the ball field. I'm within arm reach of you so that you can hand me a card. So much of governance is so far separated. I've maintained for a long time that governance really starts to, in my more activist days, I would have said break down. I think I would say now it changes radically when I no longer have a reasonable hope of running into my elected representatives at the grocery store.
I agree. The further you get from your constituents, I would imagine the harder it is for folks to govern. And the North Star is, I get to see these issues. A great example would be when someone wants to talk to their commissioner or someone on their city council about their roads being plowed in the winter. That's an easy discussion to have, because when someone says to me, I'm worried about the berms on this county road and the ability to see when I'm entering the highway, I've probably gone by that county road in the
Or you
last
can get
day
in the
or two,
car and-
or I
and
can
get
go
there
there
in
and I can
20
check
minutes.
that out. When a citizen calls the representative in Denver, who happens to live, their home base is Durango or Vail or someplace that's not here, and says, I'm really concerned about the crumbling shoulder on Highway 50 at the base of Monarch Pass, that representative doing their best to listen to the constituent and hear what the constituent has to say, they don't drive by that corner.
There's a
every
limit to
single
what
day.
is possible.
There's a limit to what is possible. And you look at some of these, especially in western and eastern Colorado, you'll get some of the vast geographic challenges of some of these districts. They're tough. I mean, Barb McLaughlin, who represents Gunnison, lives in Durango. And when you have a district that goes from Durango up through Silverton, through Hinsdale County and Lake City to Gunnison, it's challenging to know every nook and cranny.
Yeah, before the car, those would have been 7 separate countries.
Yeah.
For their inaccessibility.
Yep.
Well, a lot of people are prone to express frustration these days about the state of politics, and what they're thinking about is how it works at the national level. Is that an opportunity, do you think, to look at those people and say, well, you're just thinking about the wrong echelon. Get involved with what's going on here. It really is possible to have democracy function the way it's intended when you've restricted your view to local issues. Is that a valid thing to say to people?
I think yes, it is. And for me, at a personal level, I think one of the things that's making governance at the state and especially at the federal level more difficult is the amount of money and where the money is coming from in politics. And I think it's hard to have a talk about representative democracy without having to talk about that.
Right.
When it costs money, thousands of dollars to do a county commissioner campaign. But I like that folks can open up those books, and you can do it with any elected official. But I mean, they're going to open up the book, or the local paper is going to sit there, and maybe it's not as exciting that Jonathan Houck got $25 from this person or $200 from this person, but they're from people.
Yeah.
And
most of them we know where they live.
Yeah, and it's not ever really all that surprising. But when I look at someone who's running for office and they're especially the House of Representatives, and this is to both sides of the aisle. I am not dividing this in any way by political affiliation. But when you're running for 2-year terms at a pop, you basically do a session and start fundraising again. And when we're in the millions and millions and millions of dollars, and the number of hours those folks spend on the phone fundraising, that's not hours spent on the phone with issues and with people and with community. I watch our state and national elected officials. They spend time in Gunnison County, and I think they try to get here as much as they can, but could they be here more if they weren't chasing the dollars?
Yeah, right.
And so, it gets into conversations about term limits. I've always felt that elections are a form of term limits. Vote in the people you want, vote out the people you don't want. And so we could go down lots of rabbit holes with term limits and funding, but I think the American public needs to expect more as well. And I've had people as recently as just the other week say, I voted for you and now I'm very disappointed with you. And I said, okay, about a issue or all the things that I'm representing? And typically it's a issue. And I try to turn that back into being like, well, you can just go vote for someone else. I don't want to give that. I want to say, help me better understand where you feel how I'm representing you is falling short. And that's a conversation. And I'll say I have the luxury of having those conversations a lot.
And it is a luxury.
That's
the point of local governance.
And I never thought that I would. My friends from college, it's very funny to, I have so many friends that have graduated from Western and gone to other places in the country, and they just laugh. They're like, you didn't ski. You didn't like winter. Who figured you would be the lifer? And let alone city council, mayor, county commissioner. This is just funny. But I have one of my friends say to me, and I think he said it half serious and half joking, but he was a roommate for a long time. He's a teacher out in Bend, Oregon. But I remember when I got elected to the city council, and I sent him a message. I'm like, man, I got elected to the city council. And he said, man, you've been campaigning since you worked at the Bean. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, that was your entry into the community.
Yeah.
That was you went away from college and into community.
Well, and it's a recognition that coffee shops are absolutely a part of the political landscape.
They are.
So I've got a couple of final questions for you.
Okay.
Let's suppose that you're term limited, and that's up next week. Okay. So you're going to have to step aside. I would love for you to cast a glance backward and say, that's the thing I'm most proud of. That's the thing I'm happiest to have been a part of. to help this community achieve, what would that be?
I mean, I think there are easy benchmarks, for things, but to me, it's more of a spirit. My time on the city council, the Community Foundation did such a great job of bringing forth the Speak Your Piece. It was a civility initiative, and then as a commissioner, the One Valley Prosperity Project, it was the outreach, and I felt the things that we're working on. So we're working on housing, we're working on sustainable tourism. When I was with the city, it's real easy to say, hey, when I was on the council with other people, and this wasn't just me, and a community that backed it, we built a swimming pool or we invested in these trails. Those are great outcomes. But I feel like there's an idea that you listen. So as a community, again, this isn't me as a single elected official. I think we've painted this tone of let's have these ability to do outreach, listen and hear, and do outreach that works for people. And
do you feel that's changed?
I feel that's becoming more robust. But then we also get stuck in analysis paralysis. Well, let's just have another meeting on it. Let's do another flow chart. But at some point you have to act. But I do feel that there is this idea of there are ways to engage the community here and listen. I think for me that's something that's really important. At a personal level, I'm happiest that when I was elected commissioner, I made the promise that I would treat it as a full-time job. And that meant weird hours, way beyond just showing up prepared for a Tuesday meeting, taking on things and opportunities for the community. And I would hope, and I say that I'm proud of that, not from the standpoint of, hey, look what I did, but hopefully that has helped usher in a little bit of this idea that as a county commissioner, you're compensated well. The state sets a salary for you. It's an amazing opportunity. And it shouldn't be anything less than full steam ahead, treated as a full-time job, and really.
Well, all of those 8 or 10 legs to the stool that you mentioned really require professional levels of education and involvement.
Yeah, and I think beyond being an elected official, there's all kinds of fun things that I've been part of in this community, the arts and recreation and things, and I look forward to continuing to have input into the community in those ways after I'm not an elected official anymore.
Well, so the second half of the question then is the same retirement is facing you next week. What would you look back on and say, oh, dang it, I wish I'd had time to accomplish X?
There's some things that we're working on that I wish we had put my time on the city council, for example, in the mid 2000s, I wish I understood where we were heading in the housing issues that we're having now. There were some indicators there are many things where I'm like, man, I wish we had acted faster or we got out in front of this more. But as far as I'm hard pressed to think of a specific issue where I'm like, man, we should have, because I feel like we're tackling things as they're coming forth in the community, some with more urgency than others. Some we're trying to make up ground. Others we're trying to be out ahead of and in front of. Yeah.
A lot of that's about tactical issues and how you handle them. But the question really is more of on a philosophical level. Would you have any sort of unfinished business kind of regrets?
No, because I believe good governance is a process that involves people, and it doesn't good things or bad things doesn't hinge on me as one single person. I'm one of many people in this, and so
nothing would come crashing to a close just because you step aside.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I really hope is that people see this opportunity as, I feel like everybody takes a turn, not just at being elected, but in your community you take a turn, whether it's hey, I'll step up and bring the snacks for the 4th grade Halloween party to I'll, be a 4-H volunteer, or I'll help coach, or I'll serve on a board, or I'll run for office. I mean, this community ticks because so many people do so much. And I think I try to remind people all the time, I'm a county commissioner. I feel very proud of that opportunity, but 3 people don't make this community tick. Mm-hmm. Thousands of people make this community tick, and there's so many people doing so much good stuff in this community, and it's phenomenal. And it's why we have things at the end of the day like pet shelters, and we have
Food banks.
And we have people in our community that up and leave, that they volunteer for the Red Cross, and they do stuff way outside this community that people don't even know about to help other people. We have a search and rescue team. We have just an amazing amount of opportunities. It's because people are doing that, And at the end of the day, it's a community thing, and I know that's kind of, cliche, and people are like, it takes a village, but it is,
Yeah.
And our village is pretty awesome.
Well, that's a great place to wrap up. We talked about local governance. That was our purpose. Local governance here is about place and people.
Absolutely.
Jonathan, thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, Alan, thank you very much. It's always enjoy our conversations, and whether in front of the mic or behind the mic, that's great, but thank you.
All right.
Think Radio is supported by the Gunnison Country Times, Gunnison, Colorado's locally owned hometown newspaper.
Think Radio is a production of Alan Wardis Media. The show's associate producer is Kat Seibert. Music by Issa Forrest. You've been listening to Think Radio on KWSB FM 91.1 in Gunnison, Colorado, from the campus of Western State Colorado University. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Think Radio.